Ladies and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. This is show number 32. My name is Simon Head, and joining me as always is Mr. Chimakar Sandhu. And this is a bit of a special this week because we're going to look back on an event that is particularly relevant to us Brits. UFC Fight Night 107, better known in this part of the world as UFC London, took place on Saturday night at the O2 Arena right here in London, England. And a lot of people were crapping on this card before the actual event started, and surprise, surprise, it actually delivered. Jimmy Manuwa, superb performance in the main event. Gunnar Nelson showing why everybody on this side of the pond absolutely loves him. We bid farewell to Brad One Punch Pickett and a couple of other young British stars, Arnold Allen, Leon Edwards and Mark Diakiese, all picked up very important wins as they look to push their career forward. Amazing stuff, Sandhu. We were working shoulder to shoulder as part of Team MMA Junkie throughout the week, and plenty to unpack on this week's show.
Yeah, there certainly is. We were there covering the event from Wednesday. On Wednesday, Junkie have this kind of deal. It's quite a rare deal. It's a deal that's normally only reserved for broadcast partners, and that's to get access to a large chunk of the main card fighters and even those perhaps scattered on the undercard a day before the rest of the media. So we had the opportunity, both you and I, to sit down with a bunch of fighters one-on-one on Wednesday. Then on Thursday we had the official media day. Friday we had the weigh-ins, the ceremonial weigh-ins with guest fighters. Friday night we had an impromptu fire alarm go off due to a real fire in the fighters' hotel where everybody was evacuated, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And then of course on Saturday night we had a packed O2 Arena with over 15,000 fans in attendance to see Jimmy Manuwa right at the top of the bill, London's very own, the poster boy, get it done big time with big style points. So yeah, absolutely so much to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to it this week.
Let's do this in some sort of chronological order if we can. We sat down on a Wednesday at the Fighter Hotel. First of all, to give you an idea of the setup that we had in Fight Week, John Morgan, who is the big dog at MMA Junkie, he goes to more events than most of the UFC staff. He came over to the UK. Actually came over a day early. Because of some flight issues, he had to take an earlier flight. But he's managed to secure an Airbnb apartment where myself, John, and our buddy Abby Saban were all staying. You had to kind of juggle Fight Week with your day job, which was a bit of a challenge, but you managed to get it done. And
absolutely.
But our home base, if you like, was this apartment. And it couldn't have been better located. We were effectively in the building next to the hotel, right there on Canary Wharf. And that proved quite useful as the week progressed, as we will mention in a minute. But we'd just pop over to the Fighter Hotel, the Hilton Canary Wharf. Very nice it is too. And the media room wasn't all that, to be honest. It wasn't the most conducive to what we were looking to do. Vicky, who looks after the media for the UFC, very helpfully gave us free use of the boardroom. We had a huge boardroom table and all the room we needed to conduct all these one-on-one interviews. And one of the big takeaways I had from that day, Sandhu, was I think the first interview you did, Corey Anderson. I've got to admit I didn't expect the interview to be anything that would be absolutely mind-blowing or anything like that. I just thought it would be your standard run-of-the-mill pre-fight interview. But I sort of came away after listening to that interview just super impressed with the guy, and even more so after Fight Night on Saturday night. But he's a real character and someone to really keep an eye on. And anybody out there who is in the UK MMA media, I know we do get occasionally people listen to us who are colleagues of ours. If you get a chance to talk to Corey again, definitely sit down with him because he's a great interview, isn't he?
He really is. And again, I think this is one of those things where when you get the chance to speak to any fighter a day before the rest of the media, they haven't been bombarded with the same question over and over and over again. And so Corey's, he just got to town a day or two earlier. And so he hadn't really a chance to kind of like really settle in and see much of London. He was all business at that point. But he was fired up. And I loved it. Like you said, we were all in the same room. He gave us some fantastic sound bites. He was coming in with a lot of confidence. One of the main kind of storylines and narratives that I didn't think the UFC played out promotionally was the idea of Jimmy Manuwa having already had an opportunity to main event in the O2 Arena. It didn't go his way against Alexander Gustafsson. That wasn't really pushed to the fore. And I think that's a big storyline, especially because now he got the big payoff with that storyline behind it. And at the time, when we spoke to him or when I interviewed him, Corey was of the same kind of mindset. He was like, "You're absolutely right. This should be playing on Jimmy's mind. I'm sure he's going to be very, worried when he walks out, when his friends and family and fans are all there, because he's been in the spotlight before and he's failed." So he was giving us some great sound bites, and just in general, I think he was being really realistic about where he is right now. He is arguably the youngest and most, I suppose. He doesn't have as much fight experience as the rest of the top 10, so he's quite fortunate to be in the position that he's in. And at the time, he's like, "Listen, I'm just trying to put the work in." He's only been in the UFC for a couple of years, only fighting professional MMA, I think 3 or 4 years. So yeah, it was like a refreshing to see someone like Corey Anderson, an American, come over here, in hostile territory and kind of have that air of swagger about him.
You said he gave some decent sound bites. You dropped a decent one yourself in that interview. I remember he was saying he's been working his socks off in the gym, in there 24/7, and quick as a flash, you were straight onto it. You went, well, 24/7 is not enough. It's got to be 25/8, right? And he had a bit of a laugh about that. He took it really well, and yeah, it's funny. I asked
that's when you spend too much time with Simon Head, where you could be quick off the trigger like that.
There you go. The Jedi Master. But it was good fun, and I had a chance to quickly chat to him during the media day, and asked him about the nickname thing, and he was pretty funny about it. So no, all respect to Corey Anderson. We'll talk about him again a little bit later in the show when we get to the actual main event. So yeah, we had some good sit downs on the Wednesday. We talked to Corey Anderson, we talked to Brad Pickett, we talked to Brett Johns. We talked to Makwan Amirkhani. At one point, I was drafted in to be some sort of family photographer. I had to take a picture of all of Makwan's team. Just more and more people suddenly seemed to appear, and I was there. I had to take a picture of them. But it was good fun. And then the Thursday we had the media day for real, and that's when the work really sort of kicked off. And to give you an idea of what a media day is like, you've got a big open room. They put the stalls out, one for each fighter with the big name cards next to it. And it's done in two halves, and they did the stare downs in between. But before that, we had an announcement. Joe Carr, the man who is now heading up all of the UFC's international offices, following the departure of James Elliott, who was the last remaining regional VP. So he's now taken over all of the regional offices. He got up on the stage to announce 3 European events coming up later this year. We are going back to Glasgow, Scotland, Sandhu, which I'm very excited about. We are going back to Rotterdam, which I'm even more excited about. And we're also going to Gdansk in Poland, which I was very surprised about. 3 European shows to go along with the London show that we just had and the show coming up in Stockholm. So that's 5 events in a year in Europe, which is sort of par for the course, really. I have a sneaky feeling we might get a 6th one towards the end of the year. I wouldn't be surprised if they go to Ireland or Northern Ireland before the end of the year. That's not because of any insider knowledge, so don't go out booking any holiday plans for the sort of back end of the year on the basis of this. But I just think it makes sense to do something in Ireland towards the back of the year. It makes sense to me. But we've got some good stuff coming up. How do you see this all panning out? It's an interesting one, isn't it, Sandy? We've lost James Elliott, and we've spoken about it. I think we spoke about it on the MMA Roadshow. It's a major loss. We actually we managed to break that news. It came just after we recorded the show last week, and James actually texted me and apologised for the news coming out after we'd recorded the show, which is very nice of him. But he did actually text, "I'm ever so sorry that we did this after the show. You could have talked about it, but here we are talking about it now." How big of a loss do you think James is going to be as we move forward this year?
Massive, and here's why. Like you said, Simon, we spoke about it a little bit on the MMA Roadshow. When you lose a regional director or regional manager, of say the Brazilian office, it's Brazil, it's one language, it's one set of relationships. What James was able to do, and what his role, that was held by Dave Allen, and before Dave Allen held by Gary Cook out of the London office. You're managing relationships with multiple markets here in Europe, multiple different relationships, different languages, sometimes relationships with different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. Takes time to mature, right? And to have somebody on the ground here in London, here in Europe, to be able to kind of have these consistent meetings and to grow these relationships, has been very important. One of the things that the schedule does tell me, and this goes back to kind of the philosophy that Gary Cook implemented way back when he was in charge. The idea was to go to major cities in Europe, but then to almost make sure you try and go back year upon year upon year to establish and grow those markets. So when I hear Glasgow, when I hear Stockholm, that's got to be at the 6th, 7th, or 8th Stockholm event by now. When I hear Rotterdam, right? Again, you're just building upon the success from the previous year. Of course, London's always a staple. That's always a bit of a no-brainer with them having a London office. But moving forward, I'm not sure. I mean, James did such a great job, especially helping strike some of these TV deals in various markets, whether it be to Scandinavia, Hungary, in Germany, you name it. Not just the TV deals, but the media partnerships. I know that, of course, WME, IMG. Oh, and here's the other thing. James used to work for IMG.
How ironic's that?
Yeah, exactly. So I was even more, secure in my mind that him having that kind of, job on the resume, having worked with IMG, that would have solidified his position even more because he's an IMG kind of guy, right? But then, of course, you've got, Ari Emanuel and Patrick Whitesell. These guys, they know what they're doing when it comes to global TV deals and things of that nature. And John told a story how the UFC here were about to strike a deal with a particular network. The country or the region of the market doesn't come to mind, but
Hungary, I think it was.
There you go, Hungary, and they basically said, "Wait, don't let the ink hit that paperwork just yet. We can double it." So that's the kind of position of power and kind of experience that they come in. But I just think generally it was just great to have James around. He got it. He understood, I suppose, what some of the European media that cover the sport go through. He knows that for a lot of guys, it's not a full-time gig. They try and jump on as many opportunities as possible. So I'm sure he and the rest of the London team have always tried to be as flexible as they can be, for us. So yeah, it's a blow. It is a blow, and it's just one of those things where we've seen other familiar faces that were kind of on the European circuit quite a bit, like Eric Winter, and now James Elliott, move on. But I think when you look back at his tenure, I mean, you mentioned it, Simon. I think it was on Twitter. You said he brought a massive, massive event to London last year with Bisping, Anderson Silva, the best Christmas present. I mean, I know all these matches are made out of the Las Vegas office, but James and these regional managers are always trying to push to get the biggest fights in their market. Title fight, Bisping versus Dan Henderson, Manchester, a challenging thing to do, especially with the late night airing for the US market. That was quite a logistical problem. So he's got nothing, but positivity from us in the media. I think he's got a lot to be proud about in terms of what he was able to accomplish. And I think, like he said on his Twitter feed, he left as a fan of the sport. And like even as late as this fight week, where he wasn't as visible throughout fight week as he has been at previous events. But I heard him still batting for the UFC, batting for the sport, and mentioning Bellator in regards to how much the sport is growing specifically in Europe. So yeah, it's gonna be a shame not to see him on the normal MMA and UFC circuit moving forwards. But tip of the cap to him. It's been great having him around.
Absolutely, we wish him all the best for whatever he does next. I suspect that whatever he does, we may well be hearing about it. So,
shall we speculate? I mean, I did bring it up on the roadshow a little bit, and maybe our audience never got a chance to hear it. But one of the things that I speculated is Bellator are hiring a lot of ex-UFC staff, and they are also aggressively pushing into the European market. They're holding a hell of a lot of events. Who better to help perhaps lead that expansion here in Europe than James Elliott, whenever he's, I suppose, legally allowed to, I suppose, communicate with them, if staying within the sport is still something that he wants to do. What are your thoughts on that side? Bellator and James Elliott, could that be a possibility?
I'd like to think it is, but I somehow don't think it will be. I think he might have other plans.
Okay.
He's definitely a sport guy. I don't think we're going to see him out of the realm of sport. He used to work for the Football Association. He used to be a football marketing executive for Puma, and prior to that, IMG. He could go back into the football sphere quite easily. He could go into some sort of representation angle, because his father was one of the big super agents in this country not that long ago. So maybe there's the chance to follow in his father's footsteps and carry on the family business. Who knows? But I certainly expect that he'll be certainly heavily involved in the sports industry somewhere. As an MMA writer and MMA journalist, I would love nothing more for him to still be part of our bubble. And if he became the UK head of Bellator, I think we would all be very, very happy about that, because he's a known entity at this point. We know him well. We know the way, he's a straight shooter. He deals with the media very well, and he's been a joy to deal with during his tenure with the UFC. So, but it looks as if there's going to be a bit of a different direction from the UFC. It's important to note that James left of his own volition as well. This wasn't a leave before you're pushed kind of situation. He voluntarily offered up his resignation. So you would hope that if he has his next move planned, you would certainly hope that he does have his next move planned, and that we find out soon what it might be. And if I do find out and I'm in a position to let you guys know on the show, then I will. But he owes me a trip to the Isle of Man TT. He promised me in Croatia, because we're both big motorcycle racing fans, right, that he would take me to the Isle of Man TT for a few beers.
All right, there you go.
It hasn't happened yet, so I'm going to have to call that one in at some point before he completely disappears over the horizon. So James Elliott, if you're listening to this, I'm going to be getting on the phone very soon. But moving on from that. The bigger picture with this, of course, is that the whole landscape of the UFC in Europe is changing. It's going to be centrally managed. There are IMG offices dotted around the world. It makes sense to move the current staff that are in Chiswick into the IMG office. In Shoreditch to the IMG offices in Chiswick. It's going to be a pain in the arse for everybody, because
except for me and Abby,
except for you and Abby, who live around the corner. It's lovely for you, but most of the people probably live quite nearby. So it's going to be a bit of a wrench, but fingers crossed that they don't ship too many more staff. I know, they've got a very small, dedicated team who, in reality, have punched way above their weight in terms of the amount of people in that team and what they've been able to deliver over the last 12 to 18 months. They don't get any credit for it, because they're not people beyond that even smaller MMA media bubble would know anything about. But they've done a phenomenal job, and I hope that their expertise is kept on as things start to progress in Europe. That was the start of the media day. We had the announcement of the 3 upcoming shows, and then we went into media day. We went round. We spoke to all the different fighters. got some good stuff out of all of them. My highlight was watching Mark Diakiese telling a Finnish TV crew how he was going to knock their boy out in the first round, and they just basically winding up the Finnish TV crew, who appeared not to have much of a sense of humour. They were just kind of standing there and taking it from him. But yeah, it was a good packed, busy day. And the weigh-ins got a bit lively on the Friday, Sandhu. Diakiese was front and centre in that, wasn't he?
He was, and I think Sean Shelby must have had about 3 or 4 heart attacks during the course of the actual weigh-ins. So you had Mark Diakiese just kind of like flicking Packalen's hand away a couple of times. He was not interested in in any handshake whatsoever. Then you had the 2 big men. You had Timothy Johnson and Daniel Omelenchuk pretend to go at it. And I almost kind of look back at Dave Scholler's expression when he was trying to part John Jones in DC, and Sean Shelby had to kind of get involved, and Ricky Mineta, Security Steve, they're all there. And then the 2 heavyweights start to kind of, 2 heavyweights start to crack up. And then when you think it's all said and done, Arnold Allen and Makwan Americani, probably the best of the bunch, they go at it.
But they look like they really went at it to start with. Like Arnold launched himself.
Yeah, they kind of chest bumped each other, and then kind of told Sean Shelby we're only messing around, and he's got that look on his face like he's just had a bit of a mild aneurysm or a heart attack. And so it was all good fun, though. It was all good fun. The weigh-ins, were good. I thought the best part about the weigh-ins was the kind of like the guest fighters that they had available. You got some big names there. Francis Ngannou, obviously huge prospect in the heavyweight division, really making waves. Well. Huge man and a scary-looking man as well.
Yeah.
He's obviously from France. Misha Tate recently retired. Former UFC bantamweight champion, and then you had Mickey Gall there, and then you had Claudio Gadella. But I thought the real star of the actual guest fighter Q&A was Dan Hardy.
Yeah.
Dan Hardy had to deal, and actually I've got nothing but the best things to say about Dan throughout the entire weekend. But there were a couple of moments. One I'll get to a little bit later on, and you'll probably mention it yourself, Simon. But the one I'm going to mention for now is the way he handled a question from one of the fans, and there was no policing the microphone section in the crowd. So it wasn't like one of those things where perhaps in Vegas you'd have somebody from the UFC personnel allowing you to get a question in and then telling you to kind of go back to the line or go back to your seat or something. So it was kind of like free reign. And one of the guys basically said, "What's up with this card? Bellator's bringing a better card, etc., etc." And I thought Dan handled it like a true professional, really expertly. He put the Bellator main event over, like you should, rightly so.
Yeah.
He mentioned the main event, Paul Daly versus Rory McDonald. Obviously, Paul Daly, a former training partner and friend of his. And then rightly so, he did say, and I agree, and I think we can both agree, that the UFC card is better because, first of all, you don't really have a Bellator card to compare it against. Bellator haven't released the entire card, so how can you even compare the two? And even when that Bellator card is totally released and we know what we're looking at, we know for a fact it's not going to be as good from top to bottom as a UFC card because the UFC have the lion's share of the best fighters in the world, right? So you can't just judge, a card on one fight or a main event, right? So, and of course, Dan's standing there as a UFC employee. So what do you expect him to say, right? So I thought he kind of like, balanced the tightrope, so to speak, very well in how he handled that response by putting that main event over, like he truly should, like he rightly should, as just an MMA fan first and foremost. But then, putting that fan in his place with regards to not knocking the card that the UFC put together for London, which was, like Dan said, absolutely brimming full of UK and European prospects, some of who could be the next big stars in the sport. So tip of the hat to Dan Hardy for an absolutely fantastic job at the guest Q&A.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. I thought, it's difficult because it would have been very easy for him to have gone full on corporate mode and have just shut it down completely, or not even mention, the fact that this Bellator card, the main event is a good fight. But he spoke to the guy in a way that people can sort of look back at it and go, okay, he's been fair. He's not been blinkered. He's not been too much of a company man there. But he also did defend the UFC card, which I think was also a job that he needed to do at that point. But yeah, no, I thought he did really well, and I completely agree. We've got other stuff to say about Dan Hardy as we go along with this podcast. That was weighing day. Sean Shelby probably went and had a little quiet sit down and I thought, right, I'm not going to let these bastards do that to me again. But yeah, that wasn't the end of the day on weighing day. We got back to the MMA Junkie pad, cracked open a few cold beers, finished off the edits that we were doing, had a slice of pizza. We're putting our feet up at the end of the day, just chilling out, thinking, okay, the bulk of the work is done now, gents. It's fight night tomorrow. And then we got a text from our good friend who goes by the name of Fiasco Jones, a UFC staffer no less, and he informed us that the fire alarms were going at the Fighter Hotel. And actually, once we saw the text, we realised that we could hear the fire alarms going from the balcony of our apartment, and that people were being evacuated from the hotel. So we all had a bit of a chuckle about the whole thing, and then thought, we need to get down there. So, like the A-team, we sort of flung the doors of the apartment open, grabbed our gear, and charged down there like some sort of Ron Burgundy-style news crew. And we had all angles covered. I was doing live video, I think, on Twitter. You and Abby was shooting video that was going to later appear on the MMA Junkie site. I think John Morgan was getting some background information from some of the people involved. And it was like being part of a proper breaking news crew for a minute there. But it was, I mean, for us, it was a hell of a lot of fun. For the fighters, it sure wouldn't have been particularly fun. John Kavanagh was hilarious. If you haven't seen the video, by the way, go on to MMA Junkie and just scroll down a little bit until you find the story, because there's some absolute comedy gold in it, and like Mark Diakhese couldn't have given less shits about the whole thing. It was brilliant. John Kavanagh had just come back from a restaurant, and I think may possibly have had a pre-show cocktail, and was hilarious. It was good fun. It was good fun. John Gooden was explaining his situation. He was all ready to put his pipe and slippers on, I think, and turn in for the night. But it was a crazy night. We had a lot of fun covering it, but it clearly caused a fair bit of upheaval. The one person who wasn't affected by it apparently was Makwan Emekani, because he wasn't even staying in the hotel. So, but it was a mad night, Sandhu, wasn't it?
It was like one of the only moments that I felt like a breaking news story, camera crew, TMZ, CNN style. You're on the scene of the crime or the event. And we don't normally get to do stuff like that in this sport, because all of the opportunities for the media are very much in a controlled, scheduled environment where you have an itinerary. You know the location, you know the time, you know what you're going to get, you can plan for it. And even when stuff goes wrong, like a missed weigh-in or a John Jones failing a drug test, you're informed, but it's still a scheduled press conference that you can prepare for. This was us just reacting to a situation. Thankfully, the apartment that we were staying in at the time was right next door to the Fighters Hotel. So like you said, Simon, we could hear absolutely everything. I get that WhatsApp message from Fiasco Jones. And you know, like you said, Si, we could hear sirens, we could see the flashing blue lights, and it was fantastic. And yeah, you're absolutely right. John Kavanagh was definitely under the influence, and you know, I don't blame him. It was some Paddy's Day for God's sake. and it was absolutely fantastic. Some real quality lines coming out of Kavanagh, and it was one of the most fun pieces of content. And actually, throughout the entire week, that was the most fun I had working on any content, and it was great because it was literally an entire Team MMA Junkie Europe produced piece where you had me and Abby with the on the scene video interviews. You were writing the actual report. We had Per from Stockholm taking some pictures. So I was really proud of that particular piece. And it got a lot of good feedback. It was, and we were talking a little bit off air about this, Simon, but that was one of the rare pieces, considering this is a UFC Fight Night London card on Fight Pass only. It's not on, mainstream TV in America or pay-per-view. And that particular piece ended up in MSN on the main USA Today website. So it got lots of traction, got lots of attention, and like I said in the piece. Finally, UFC Fight Night London was officially lit.
that was the line. That was the line. I loved it. It was good fun. It was good fun. It's one of those. I think sometimes when you come away from a fight week as a journalist, and they can blend in one into another sometimes, but quite often you can remember a fight week by an incident that happened. Or, I mean, I'll always remember UFC 200 was chaos anyway, but the moment when we were in the press conference and Dana White announced that the main event was now Brock Lesnar versus Mark Hunt, and everyone's looking at each other. And then Jeff Nowitzki walks in the left-hand side of the room and everyone sees him, and almost as a collective go, oh, shit. Because they knew what was coming, and it was obviously a drug test failure and all the rest of it. And just you just get these little moments, and that fire alarm thing was a bit of a moment, and it was good fun to do that. I hope we don't get too many more of those, just because it can't have been good for the fighters. It can't have been good for the fighters as they got ready for Fight Night, and Fight Night itself, despite the upheaval and the confusion and having to spend best part of 2.5 hours out of their hotel, the fighters delivered. Lena Landsberg versus Lucy Pudilova. Let's rip through this card, Sandhu. Lena Landsberg, Lucy Pudilova. Who'd have thought that after being absolutely smashed by Cyborg, Lena Landsberg would come away from this fight looking even worse than she did after the Cyborg fight? But trust me, she did. I saw her in the hotel after the fight, and her head was hot. The right hand side of her head was just ridiculously swollen. She must have been in an incredible amount of pain. She was grinning away and trying to enjoy the evening, but she picked up the win remarkably, 29-28 across the board, in a fight that I thought she lost. But she picked up the win. Then we had Brad Scott versus Scott Askham, Sandhu, and this was a real tear-up, wasn't it, this one?
It really was. It was labelled the Battle of Britain, and it was a very evenly contested fight. Not the most technical of fights. There were moments where it just turned into a bit of a brawl. But I highly recommend everyone, please go find it where you can. It's available on MMA Junkie. Go watch the post-fight media scrum with Brad Scott. He got the win, split decision, and it meant the world to him. When I actually ended up watching the full scrum, I got quite teary-eyed about it, and
I got goosebumps again. You talking about it, actually.
Yeah, because it's moments like that where you can see how much a win in the UFC means to fighters. For Brad, it means job security. He didn't want to get cut from the UFC. He wants to keep fighting. He feels he can do better. He thinks he needs to work with a support psychologist, because he was kind of like going through the moments, questioning himself and wondering if he can actually perform to his best. And what he wants to try and do is replicate what he does in the gym on Fight Night. And as for Scott Askham, I hope that the UFC don't cut him, but just being realistic, at the rate that they're trimming the fat, I think Scott might be let go. But like if that is the case, we've spoken about this before, Simon. If you're going to get let go, now might be the best time when you've got Bellator being super aggressive with European expansion. I'm sure the likes of Cage Warriors and Bama and KSW and ACB, there's a lot of options in Europe now, and the promotions that are kind of available to fight for, are shelling out quite a few bob for fighters who have got the UFC on their resume. So we'll see what happens to Scott Askham, but congratulations to Brad Scott. And I'd love to see him come back sooner rather than later. He was off for quite some time. Let's get him perhaps on that Glasgow card later on this year.
Yeah, that would be good. He mentioned in the post-fight scrum, he mentioned to us that he thinks he's got a suspected rotator cuff injury. So that's something that he needs to get. I think he said he needs to go and have an MRI and check that out. And that's the sort of injury that can really plague you as your career goes on. It's a very difficult injury to treat sort of entirely. It's the sort of thing that comes back and bothers you again and again. But it's also something that you can kind of fight through if it's treated with painkillers and things like that. So he's going to go and have that checked out and find out what's what. He wants to get back as soon as he can as well. And I've got to be honest, standing in that scrum and watching him go through the emotional roller coaster like that, I'd have to say it was difficult. You almost didn't want to ask him a question anymore. You just wanted to to give the guy a hug and a pint of beer, and just just say, you don't need to talk to us anymore, Brad. Just go and have a beer and enjoy your night. But that was an emotional one. It sort of got you right in the feels, that one. If that one was emotional, the fight that followed it was just high-flying brilliance. Mark Diakiese. We've been high on this guy for a while. Anyone who's been listening to the Brit Pack from episode 1, I think one of the early questions that we had was pick one name out as a guy to watch from the UK going forward, and the name that I gave was Mark Diakiese. This guy is absolute dynamite, and all week long he was telling us that he was going to knock out Teemu Packalén in the first round. He also said he was going to do it with a spinning head kick. And I remember I said to him, you're giving yourself a bit of a job here. And he's like, I can do it. And he nearly did it as well. The actual fight itself, or almost all of it, in fact, because it only lasted 30 seconds. The final exchange that really finished the fight, that is up on YouTube for you to watch. And if you haven't seen it, then I urge you to do so. And because I guarantee you, it's not one of those videos that you watch once and then just go off and do something else. You'll watch that back 4, 5, 6, 7 times. You probably email it to all your friends or tweet it out or put it on your Facebook. It's that good. He hits Teemu Packalén with a 2-touch spinning kick that would have landed on his chin, but Packalén just about moved out the way and blocked it with his hand. He then hit him with a spinning back kick that really hurt him. And at that point, Packalén decided, I need to close the distance here. And at that point, Diakiese just lined him up and laid him out flat with a right hand. Breakdancing celebration, crowd goes nuts. And the world now knows a little bit more about Mark Bonecrusher Diakiese. This guy is absolute dynamite, isn't he?
He really is, Simon. He's arrived. He has arrived. We've spoken about this in the past, Simon. Prospects, no matter where you are, from wherever you are in the world, it takes maybe perhaps a couple of fights for you to kind of get your feet wet a little bit. And then you're always looking for that breakthrough performance, Simon. And that's the one that Mark had on Saturday night. That got him a $50,000 performance of the night bonus, one of 4 bonuses given on the night. That was one of only 4 finishes, and although there were only 4 finishes on the card, that was aside from obviously the main event, the one that kind of really stood out. And I was kind of looking at the kind of reviews and feedback from all of our friends in the MMA media circle stateside. Everyone's now really taking notice of this kid. Everyone's paying attention. It was almost a perfect kind of night for him. The only kind of thing I'd say is, and this is not just a criticism to him, but to anyone, I always like to see fighters who have big moments like that call their shot, have a name ready. He didn't go as far as that. He basically said he's happy to fight anyone that the UFC throws his way, which is basically the generic kind of response that most fighters give. But what he did say is he'd like to jump that Stockholm card in a couple of months, if that's possible. And given the fact that he hardly broke a sweat in the fight because it only lasted 30 seconds, and if he's not injured and he's physically fit, why not get him on that Stockholm card? And if that Stockholm card isn't available, get him on that Glasgow card. Because I think fighters like Mark, these European shows that perhaps aren't going to have the biggest names from the US, they could perhaps use guys like Mark, who are now starting to create a name for themselves, and they will be kind of one of the names that the guys over in the US will start to pay attention to. So in a roundabout way, it's almost like you're a big fish in a small pond if you're fighting on some of these European cards. But I think it was a fantastic night for Mark. I love the fact that he's changed his hair to red, and hopefully that's something that continues. I'd like to see him perhaps change the color of his hair depending on where he's fighting or what his Reebok kit is, because it's almost now as if like you'll remember the fight and the finish just based on what color his hair was on that fight night. So I love everything about him. He's got the charisma. He's definitely got the skill. He's got a great personality, and he's British. So let's get it on.
Absolutely, I did pull him up on the hair thing. We were actually in the boardroom on the Wednesday, getting ready to do some interviews, and we were I don't even know what we were doing. We were just getting some stuff together. And there was this voice just shouted through the door, "Simon Edge, you're talking crap." I'm like, "What? What's that? You're talking crap, Simon." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And Mark Diacasi pops his head through the door. "You all right, mate? How you doing?" So I went and had a chat with him, and I immediately sort of pulled him up on the hair thing and said, "Have you spoken to Dan Hardy? I take it you've signed some sort of contract, for gimmick infringement and stuff like this." And we had a bit of a joke about that, and I even spoke to Dan about it. Who said Diacasi's he wears the red mohawk better than he ever did. So that was kind of cool. But Diacasi in Sweden, I'm down for that. Give him David Tamer. Let's have Diacasi versus David Tamer. I'd love to see that.
Love that fight. So I love it.
If they didn't, if the WME IMG guys and Sean Shelby decide he needs to be put in front of an American audience, I want to see him fight Sage Northcutt. That's the fight I want to see on American soil. Diacasi versus Sage Northcutt. I think that would be spectacular. I also think he would take Sage Northcutt to pieces as well. But I think that would be an exciting fight, and a fight that would just elevate his star even further. So if they take him to America, give him Super Sage. If we're keeping him in Europe, David Tamer in Sweden would be absolute dynamite. I'd love to see that fight. Someone else who we're beginning to sort of play fantasy matchmaker for after this weekend is Leon Edwards, who defended Vicente Luque. This fight, it went all 3 rounds. Edwards won a unanimous decision, 29-28 on all 3 cards. It maybe didn't catch fire in a way that we might have hoped leading into it. It was probably the one, one of the fights I was looking forward to the most. But I think what it proved is Leon Edwards is definitely ready for a step up. He's definitely ready for a step up. He's got the ability to strike. He's proved that he's got the ability to take the fight to the ground and do well down there. The thing that really came out of that fight for me, Sandhu, was he demonstrated the fight IQ that you need to be a real prospect in the UFC. And what he was doing against Luque, he admitted to us after the fight that he knows that Luque has got one punch knockout power. I think these last 2 fights leading into the fight were clean KOs from the Brazilian. So he knew that he had to keep mixing things up. And even though Leon, for my money, was winning the stand-up battle anyway, he was mixing things up and shooting takedowns just as Luque looked like he was getting ready to sort of load up on stuff. So that was the big takeaway for me from Leon Edwards, just showcasing the fight IQ as well as his actual skills. And he's looking for Cowboy Cerrone next. Is that a feasible call out, do you think?
I don't think he'll get Cowboy Cerrone, but I like the call out. That's what I'm talking about. You win on home soil, and actually it was one of the fights that I was kind of most worried about of all the Brits. Even Manua in the main event, I actually thought this was going to be the one that I thought, would see a Brit lose, if I'm being quite open and honest. Because Vicente Luque is, a tough customer. But credit to Leon, he could have really put everything together. And the fact that he called out Cowboy, okay, if he doesn't get Cowboy, at least he's aiming for the right ballpark. You're aiming for a top 10, top 15 welterweight, and that's what he needs to kind of be aiming for to start to kind of make a name for himself. And maybe perhaps fighting stateside might help him do that now that he's got a nice little win streak going in the welterweight division.
Yeah, good stuff for Leon Rocky Edwards, who every time we see him, he seems to come out of his shell a little bit more. He started out not too confident with the media, but he seems to be getting better and better. And he gave a really good interview prior to his fight with us at MMA Junkie, and you could see it. There's just that gradual increase of confidence, whether it's dealing with the media, whether it's dealing with the bright lights of a UFC event, or whether it's getting in there and taking on a fellow elite prospect in Vicente Luque. Interestingly, we asked him backstage after the fight, is that the biggest, was Luque the toughest opponent of your career? Or was that the biggest win of your career? And he said no. He said the Tumenov fight was the biggest win of his career, because Tumenov was ranked 13th. And Vicente isn't quite in those rankings. So Leon wants ranked opposition from now on, and I think he deserves it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking forward to seeing how they match him, because he's going to be a tough customer for anybody, and we don't know where the ceiling is for him yet. Cowboy Cerrone would be one hell of a test, but I think Cerrone is in that sort of elite bracket where you only really make superstar fights with him at this stage. If he gets the opportunity to fight Cerrone, then that's almost as good as a title fight for Leon Edwards at this stage in his career. But I'm really looking forward to seeing where he lands next and who he fights next. Hopefully, if we're being selfish, that we get to have that over here in Europe. But we'll see where he goes next. Heavyweights followed on the card. Timothy Johnson beat Daniel Omielanczuk by split decision. Tim Johnson's beginning to specialise in these 3-round wars. He did it last time out when we saw him in action. He's also beginning to become a bit of a go-to guy for the UFC in Europe as well. He's pretty unassuming, he's got this self-deprecating sense of humour that I kind of like. He's alternating wins and losses. He's picked up back-to-back split decision wins in Europe, and that was actually his third European fight in a row. And he's 2-1 on European soil for the UFC. So who knows? Maybe we'll see him again as the MMA year progresses. The next fight, Sandhu, Francis Barbosa defeating Darren the Dentist Stewart by unanimous decision. This was supposed to be the fight where Darren Stewart really made this one, really put the exclamation point on the fact that he beat him last time, and then move on to fight at middleweight. It didn't go his way. Francis Barbosa did what he needed to do and won that one by decision. I have to admit, I saw very little of this fight due to the way the whole backstage thing worked on Fight Night. We didn't get to see too much of that one. What did you make of it?
It was a stinker, to be honest, Simon.
Glad I asked.
Not much can be said, really. I don't know. I think I was expecting a little bit more out of Darren. I liked his attitude at the weigh-ins. I've seen his social media posts since the fight. He's really apologetic. That wasn't anything what he's capable of whatsoever. We know that, considering some of his previous performances, especially coming up in the European circuit. And to be honest with you, this is probably one that he wants to kind of, put behind him now. If he's going to make that move to middleweight, let us get that done. Get it done now. Give him a fresh start, a fresh coat of paint, so to speak. That is not a fight that anyone's going to be rewatching on UFC Fight Pass anytime soon, let me tell you.
Well, he has put on Twitter already that I think he tweeted today saying, "Middleweight, here I come."
Okay.
And we mentioned Scott Askham earlier. Scott Askham's coming off a loss.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't hurt to keep him around. I'd like to see him stick around. Why not put them against each other in Glasgow? That would be a decent enough contest. and would allow one of them to move on. So
Sure, yeah.
I think that would make a lot of sense. One of them can then kick on in that middleweight division. Askren versus Darren Stewart makes sense to me. We'll see if they make that one further down the line. The featured preliminary bout and a fight that actually his teammate Arnold Allen said that this fight should have been on the main card instead of his fight, which I thought was very gracious of him. Joe Duffy defeating Reza Madadi by unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. But that really does not tell the story of just how good Joe Duffy looked in this fight. He looked, I think we saw him at like 85% maybe. You know, he didn't look. It looked to me like he had another gear if he wanted it or if he needed it. But he was also possibly a little wary with the fact that this was the last fight of his current UFC contract. That he didn't want to do anything silly, get caught, and then end up suffering a loss because he's going into negotiation stages now. Initially with the UFC, I think he's got like 90 days or something before he's contractually allowed to field offers from anybody else. It was very important that he picked up the win on Saturday night. Unfortunately, we didn't get the chance to talk to Joe backstage. He was apparently transported due to a potential foot injury. I don't know what kind of injury he's picked up there, whether it's anything serious or not. I don't think it is. But Joe Duffy, superb performance, showcasing just why he's one of the best striking stylists in that lightweight division.
Absolutely, Simon. That jab is a thing of beauty, and you know he's got a boxing background. And I thought this is one of his most complete performances. I agree with you. I think he could have perhaps gone up another level, maybe even finished Razor. But you know he did say, I think on social media, or I can't remember where actually he maybe heard it. It might have been from some of the lads over on Severe MMA, or some of the guys covering the event from Ireland. That he was a little bit hesitant just because he was wary of Razor, who is very unpredictable, and all it takes is a wild overhand right and it's lights out. So I thought he did the right thing to see the fight out. It was an easy fight to score, very, very one-sided, 30-27 on all the judges' scorecards. And now it's very interesting. This was a major storyline coming into the event. Joe Duffy is a free agent. He's going to test himself on the open market, see where he's valued at. You'd like to think that the UFC will re-sign him, Simon, but we've seen them let top 10 welterweights like Rory McDonald go. You know, today, before we started the show, it's official. Another top 10 light heavyweight in Ryan Bader has also now signed for Bellator. So Joe Duffy is not currently a top 10 lightweight. So if the UFC are serious, especially about the European market, if they're serious about the expansion especially in Ireland in the future, and to be honest with you, depending on how long Conor McGregor wants to stick around in the sport and fight for the UFC, who knows how his career is going to go. But to have somebody that's got a win against him in Joe Duffy in your back pocket is never a bad thing. Just to perhaps use that when you perhaps might need to, if maybe Conor McGregor goes on a skid, right? So, but also more importantly than all of that stuff, potential, McGregor fights down the road. Just for meritocracy alone, Joe Duffy's really starting to put things together now. He's at TriStar, like his buddy Arnold Allen is, and I think if the UFC were to re-sign him, that would give him the vigor to now start to go 110% and put it all out there, try and get some finishes under his belt and really kick on in that lightweight division. So hopefully he sticks around. But I tell you what, if he doesn't stick around with the UFC, Bellator would snap him up in a heartbeat, I'd imagine, because they are expanding heavily in Europe, specifically in the UK and Ireland, and I can see him headlining potentially multiple cards in Dublin for Bellator if that's the eventual route that this whole scenario ends up taking.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the thing with Joe Duffy, and aside from the fact that he's a damn good fighter and he comes across very well and he's got an excellent record, even his loss to Dustin Poirier, which, let's forget, that's his only loss in the UFC. Prior to that, his only other defeat came back in 2011 in a Cage Warriors World Championship fight. So, and that fight against Dustin Poirier was a good, entertaining fight. He had his share of successes in that fight before eventually losing on the scorecards rather. But the big thing here, if the UFC ever want to go back to Ireland and they want to put some Irish talent on that card, they're not going to put Conor on there. I said this week on the MMA Roadshow, I'm not convinced Conor McGregor ever fights in the UFC again. I've got a feeling we might not. I don't think we'll see him again.
I agree. Yeah,
I think it's entirely possible that we've seen Conor McGregor in the octagon for the final time. That's not what I want, but I have a sneaking suspicion that might be the case. I hope to be proved wrong, but I'm sure time will tell on that one. But even if he does stick around, he's not going to headline an event at the 3 Arena. That 9,000 seat arena in Dublin, which is the only feasible venue that they've got for the UFC. Who are they going to have? Joe Duffy is the next best guy. He was supposed to headline there 18 months ago against Dustin Poirier at UFC Fight Night in Dublin, and he suffered that flash knockout in sparring, and that knocked him off the card. He's someone who can help sell tickets, and he had a load of support in the arena on Fight Night. So he's someone who I think it's a no-brainer that the UFC sign him. I really do. I think it would be borderline negligence for them to let him go. He's too talented, and he's still got a good 3 or 4 years worth of fighting ahead of him at least. And he's still improving. I think it's a no-brainer. I would be bitterly disappointed if the UFC didn't at least make a concerted effort to keep him. That's not to say that he'll go with the offer that they give him. Bellator might come in with an absolute blockbuster offer, in which case it might make more sense for him to go to Bellator. But I would love to see him stick around in the UFC. Whoever gets him are going to have an excellent lightweight fighter on their hands, and he proved that on Saturday night. He rounded off the preliminary card at UFC London. That left us with the 4-fight main card. His teammate Arnold Allen defeated Makwan Amirkhani, who we know very well. We've covered him on many occasions, and he's a bit of a character. He's always got time for us, which is nice. Arnold Allen is a great guy as well. He's always very giving of his time. A real prospect moving forward. This was a close fight. Now, there were people in the press room who were sort of gasping in amazement when Allen got his hand raised. I was watching the fight on and off. You can't score a fight unless you're watching it properly. And arguably, you can't score a fight at all if you're watching it on television. I think there's a theory that, you can be easily swayed by commentary, camera angles, and all that sort of thing. But what I saw of the fight, it looked incredibly close. It looked very well contested, and it was a very, very grueling contest. Allen looked to me to get better as the fight went on. Amirkhani, to me, I thought won the first round, which is why I was a little surprised that the two scorecards for Arnold Allen both read 30-27, because I did watch the first round before I got dragged off to do other bits. So, how did you score it? Having sitting and watching it with a much closer eye than I did.
Yeah, I actually scored it for Makwan Amirkhani. I gave him, I think it was the first 2 rounds. I gave Arnold the third round. I think by the third round, Makwan had really started to gas. And by the third round, I just think his punches were a little bit lazy. His game is very much ground-based, grappling-based, and I think he expended the majority of his energy in the first 10 minutes of the fight. Having said that, though, this was definitely a fight of a lot of scrambles, a lot of transitions. Very, very tough fight to score. And if you scored it for Arnold, I've got absolutely no problem with that. This was literally a pick-em fight. It was a coin flip going into it, and that's exactly how these guys performed. I think Arnold eventually, especially in that third round, looked to me to be the more complete fighter. It was almost like he was kind of what's the saying, Simon? Jack of all trades, master of none. That's the saying, right?
That's it.
And whereas McQuan was very, very comfortable in one area, obviously that being on the ground and on the mat. But I mean, I loved the fight. I really, really. I mean, if they had a fight of the night performance bonus available to two fighters, this is definitely my fight of the night. I absolutely loved it, really did. But the winner was Arnold, and great moment for him. I thought it was kind of quite nice to see him kind of like almost kind of ask Dan Hardy in the post-fight interview in a sheepish way, how do I get these fans, the UK fans, to love me like they love you? And I think the best thing Arnold can do is just carry on being himself. He's still a very young man. He's in his early 20s. He's still, probably finding out who he is and getting comfortable on the mic with the cameras and the big spotlight. The talent is there. The potential talent is there. And actually, I still think he's still developing into his own body. Let's see how big and how muscular and how strong and how athletic he can eventually get, given the fact that he's got a pedigree of strong men and women in his DNA, right? So, I mean, if he can carry on, doing what he's doing over there at TriStar, with the development of his body, I'm sure he'll be, a threat to be reckoned with. But I don't want to. Whereas Mark Diakiese, I just see. Right, let's get him a top 15 ranked opponent if that's possible. With Arnold, given the performance that I saw, I'd like to see a little bit of a slower build. I'd like to see him get fights that make more sense, some careful matchmaking with him. And then hopefully we can see the development from him down the road. Perhaps if we can maybe see a couple of highlight reel finishes, whether that's a submission or a knockout, and he gets to be a little bit more comfortable, then I perhaps want to see him get a top 15 ranked opponent. What do you think, Si?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we've scratched the surface of what Arnold Allen's capable of yet. He came away from that fight frustrated at some of the things he did. He felt that he really should have been striking a lot better than he did. He felt he got dragged into playing McQuan's game and turning it into a glorified wrestling contest. And he, speaking backstage after the fight, he was very frustrated that he allowed that to happen. But he's got a lot of upside, and I think he needs to just let things progress and let things happen naturally. I know, he was a little frustrated that perhaps he wasn't getting the shine that perhaps he maybe deserved, and I know he was getting. A lot of people were sort of criticising the card and things like this, and I think he took exception to that. He took that personally. So hopefully people are beginning to get switched on to Arnold Allen. I think what he needs to really kickstart his career is a finish. I think his first UFC fight, he stepped in short notice and submitted Alan Omer in Berlin. And since then, he's had a couple of decisions, hard-fought decisions. I think what he really could do with now is another finish, just to kick him up another gear, to alert people to the fact that this is a fast-rising prospect who can mix things up a little bit. I think he's a lot better than we've seen so far. That's not a criticism of the performances that we've had from him yet. I just think he's still evolving. He's still only a kid in this game. He's in the right spot up there at TriStar, and I think we've got some good things to come for Arnold Allen. You talk about Makwan Amirkhani, and it put me into matchmaking mode again, Sandhu. I don't know what it is today. I've got a fight for him. He wants a rematch. He's already gone on social media calling for a rematch. I don't see that happening, but I have got a fight that I would be very interested in seeing, and if he's able to turn himself around for the Sweden card. How's about this? How about Makwan Amirkhani versus Teruto Ishihara in Stockholm, Sweden?
I like it, Simon. That is bang on the money, because I don't think Teruto Ishihara is exactly, going to be blazing the MMA world on fire with his potential capability. But at the same time, I think he's got a spunky personality. I think he's a fun fighter. And I think that would be a good contest to kind of get Makwan, back on the horse, so to speak. So I'm all over that fight. Love it.
Yeah, both guys coming off defeats. Ishihara lost last time out in Belfast. We were there for that one. He lost in Belfast to Artem Lobov, who has obviously gone on, and he's gonna face Cub Swanson next. So, but yeah, I was just thinking, who could he fight? Who could he fight that would still be a fight that people would pay attention to?
Yeah.
Because I don't think the American audience has quite picked up on Makwan yet, and maybe a win on Saturday might have helped. But stick him in with Ishihara, I think that, and on European soil, I think that's a fight that makes a whole lot of sense. Ishihara won over, well, he certainly won a lot of fans over in this part of the world when he came over in, when was it, November last year. So with them both coming off defeats, it gives one of them the opportunity to kick on and get back in the win column again. That was Arnold Allen versus Makwan MMA split decision, but it went Arnold Allen's way. The next fight, Sandhu, got me right in the feels. I've got to be honest. Everyone in the press room stopped. So much so that Arnold Allen himself came in to do his post-fight scrum, saw that Brad was about to fight, and said, "Oh, do we want to watch this?" And Abby said, "If you want to watch the fight first, then do the scrum after, we can do that." Mirroring the thought in every other journalist's head at the time. And he was like, "Yeah." So I ended up stood right next to Arnold Allen watching the Brad Pickett fight. So it was, but it was all going so well, Sandhu. First round, he did superbly. He got tagged once or twice, did Pickett, but he won the round. Second round, he played it smart. He went to his wrestling. He mixed things up. And Vera didn't have an answer to it. 2 rounds in, he's 2 rounds up. 2018 on the card in his last fight in his entire career. All you've got to do, Brad, 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes, stay out of trouble, fight smart. And it got to like halfway through the last round, and I'm like, "You've done well, Brad, but you're getting hit now." Because the head movement had stopped, the tiredness was setting in, and he was getting hit. And I'm thinking, now's the time for a takedown. Now's the time for a takedown. He never tried to take down, and it got to like 2 minutes, 1.5 minutes. It's like, okay, Brad, take him down now. You've got the fight in the bag. You win 29-28. He stayed on his feet. He wanted to go out the way that he has always looked to fight, on his feet, pleasing the crowd, and then bang, he gets hit with a high kick to the dome. Down he goes, 2 big hammer fists, and Grant Waterman, the man who refereed Brad Pickett's very first fight, brought the curtain down on Pickett's career by quite correctly bringing an end to his very last fight. It was, I don't even know if I can explain it. It was almost like watching a car crash in slow motion that last round. And as a British journalist who's followed Brad Pickett and has spoken to him on countless occasions and had spoken to him at length in Fight Week, that was tough to watch, man. It was really tough to watch, and it just shows, fairy tales don't happen in real life very often. And yeah, boy, it was a tough one to watch. It was a tough one to watch.
Yeah, this sport doesn't care if it's your first fight or your last fight, Simon. It will spit you out at a moment's notice, and it's really unfortunate that Brad went out the way he did. You go back to a year ago, O2 Arena, London, a much bigger spotlight on that card just due to the fact that Bisping and Silva were the headline act, and he won. And I go back to Fight Week, Simon, your one-to-one interview that you had with him, and after you'd wrapped up the official interview, we just kept on talking to Brad for about another 10-15 minutes.
Yeah.
And we spoke to him about that moment in the O2 Arena a year ago. And whereas we thought his reaction was, "Oh, I finally won, now perhaps I can call it a day," for him it was, "Great, I've won, now I can continue to fight the UFC." And, it's unfortunate that since that fight a year ago, he's, gone 0-4 in his last 4. And, he went out on his shield. But what I will say, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier on the show, the way Dan Hardy handled that post-fight interview with Brad was absolute pure class. It really was. And actually, I give credit to both Brad and to Marlon Vera. For Marlon Vera, he was obviously in hostile territory. Everybody in the O2 arena, they were on their feet for Brad, on their feet. And, where Marlon was perhaps getting booed throughout the fight, the minute he got on that microphone with Dan Hardy, even he was able to choke me up a little bit, talking about his story, how much he wanted to be on this card and fight Brad, and how Brad was an inspiration to him. And, by the end of his kind of emotional speech, you had everybody in the arena cheering him on, So he was able to turn the crowd around in his favor, giving lots of respect to Brad. And then, of course, Brad was given his moment to kind of speak to Dan and to the crowd and to the whole MMA world. And very emotional stuff, Simon. Very emotional stuff. And he may not be, I suppose, considered a global legend. Like the likes of Anderson Silva or Fedor Emelianenko or Chuck Liddell, or to name just a few. But he's a legend for UK MMA. He means a hell of a lot to the fight community here in England, and he went out on a shield. Everything about the promotion, and I was a little bit critical of the UFC with regards to how they could have promoted Jimmy's storyline heading into the main event, but I thought they did an absolute bang up job of promoting Brad Pickett's retirement fight. He walked out with the trilby. He walked out with that newspaper, and for those of you listening that perhaps aren't aware of this, that newspaper had messages from fans, from fellow fighters, from the UFC staff, from media members. I know that both Simon, you and me and our colleagues all participated in that and wrote a little message for Brad. The UFC London office did that for him. He's got his own copy and something that's framed, something that he can take away with him. So everything else was fantastic, and as he was kind of like making his way to the octagon, he was kind of like almost breathing in the moment and soaking it all up and absorbing it one final time. And I thought, oh no, is this going to be too much for him? Will this moment get the best of him? But then, like you said, Simon, those first two rounds were absolutely some of the best Brad's performed in the octagon for quite some time. Really, really good stuff out of him. And it was a very competitive fight, but Brad definitely had those first two rounds wrapped up 10-9. And like you said, Simon, all of a sudden, here comes a big head kick. His head hits the floor, rolls back. And to be honest with you, if Grant Waterman had even stopped it after that head kick, I would have been happy with it. But then, of course, Marlon Vera followed up with a couple of hammer fists, and that's all she wrote.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the Dan Hardy thing, because I think the way he handled the interview was spot on. It's sometimes people are very quick to criticize the guys who get in and do the post-fight interviews. They've got to do that. They have to react to events as they happen. They've got producers normally shouting in their ear, telling them how long they've got and all of this sort of stuff. Dan went in there, spoke from the heart as a former fighter, and gave Brad. He gave Brad the tribute that he deserved without going over the top, And I thought that Marlon Vera came away with it with an immense amount of respect. He was in tears after the fight. I watched the fight back today, and I had a lump in my throat from the minute the head kick landed, because it brought back the feeling of the night itself. But sitting and watching it and being able to properly hear the interviews, because I couldn't really hear them at the time, it was. As a British journalist, I found it, a very emotional thing. You're supposed to be impartial, and as much as possible we are, but it's hard not to root for your own, and it's hard not to root for people who in the sport who are just good people. Wins and losses in the grand scheme of things don't count for anything. It's all about how people are, and the fact that this was Brad's last fight, and he even said in the press conference, win or lose, it wasn't that important. It was the fact that he was getting to go out on his own terms and getting to go out in his hometown. And I thought it was almost perfect, wasn't it? It was almost perfect. It was just a little bit at the end. It's like the MMA gods just tapping everybody on the shoulders and say, don't get too sentimental, guys. This is the toughest sport in the world, and here's a little reminder for you. Yeah, I wish Brad all the best in his next chapter. I know he's got his own promotion, Rise of Champions, where he's looking to develop the stars of tomorrow, and he holds that out of the southeast of England. And yeah, I don't know what else he has planned. He's got his young family, so wish him all the best with that. He's going to be missed, but I also think we're all pretty much in unanimous agreement that now was the right time. Yeah, we wish him all the best. Brad One Punch Pickett, the man in the trilby hat, as he put his hat down in the cage and walked out for the very, very last time. Emotional stuff at the O2 Arena. But that wasn't even the main event. We had 2 more to go at UFC Fight Night 107 in London. Gunnar Nelson, what more can we say about this guy? He just continues to impress. I know he lost to Damian Maia, but you go to the ground with Damian Maia, you're gonna lose. There's even if you're as good as Gunnar Nelson, and Gunnar Nelson is probably the next best guy on the ground in the UFC welterweight division. I don't think there's any shame in losing to Damian Maia, but Gunnar Nelson looked absolutely phenomenal against Alan Jouban. That might have been the best win of his UFC career. Hit Jouban. It's a very strange punch that wobbled Jouban. It was a very short punch, just caught him coming in, cracked him, looked like straight across the bridge of the nose actually. And it completely sent Jouban's legs all over the place. Next thing we know, big kick, drags him to the floor, submits him. Just clinical. Amazing stuff from the Iceman. Where does he go next, Sandhu? That was impressive, wasn't it?
Very impressive. It was almost a perfect finish, really, because he rocked him and then he submitted him. So you can't do better than that. And I think, this is an interesting fight for Nelson to take, because Nelson, he's ranked number 9, or he was heading into this fight. Maybe that'll change a little bit this week. Maybe he'll go up a place or 2. To accept a fight against an unranked opponent is always a little bit strange, especially if you're well within the top 10. So, since the fight, Cavan has kind of come out and asked for Donald Cerrone. And again, if you're looking at Leon Edwards and Gunnar Nelson calling out Donald Cerrone, I think Gunnar Nelson's in a much better position to perhaps get that fight. And Cavan has also called for Wonderboy, which would be a cracking fight. I'd love to see that fight. But what I want to see is Gunnar definitely, aim for a top 5, top 6 opponent so he can start to kind of move up the ranks. He mentioned the fact that perhaps in the Rick Story fight and a few other fights in the past, he's perhaps not been too wary of the time limit of the rounds and perhaps taking a little bit too long to get going. And that's something that he's been working on. And the proof's in the pudding, Simon. He's finally putting it all together.
Yeah, I asked Gunn about that in the press conference, because he lost to Rick Story over a 5-round fight, but it always struck me watching him in that fight that it was a case of he didn't so much lose as run out of time to win, if that makes sense. I get the impression that if you put him in there with almost anybody in that welterweight division in a no time limit bout, he will eventually find a way to beat you. He's that cerebral. He's got the striking smarts that remain pretty underrated, but he's doing damage with his striking. So that's obviously there for him. Everybody knows about his submission game, and when he gets an opportunity, he jumps on it. And as soon as he gets a submission, game over, finished. So yeah, it was interesting talking to him in a press conference. He said that Story fight really was a bit of a turning point for him. And he has become more of an aggressor, a bit more of an attacking force, rather than being a bit laid back and being on autopilot. He said to me he watched that fight back, and there were times where he was watching himself going, well, what the hell am I doing? I'm not doing anything here. Why am I, So he has clearly, he's taken his coach's mantra of win or learn, and he certainly learned from that fight, and he's looked superb ever since. The Wonderboy fight, stylistically, would be brilliant. I'd love to see that. Whether the UFC would make it with so many other contenders between the pair of them in the rankings, I'm not so sure. I think if you're Wonderboy, you probably wouldn't want to drop down that far to fight the number 9 guy. Someone like Carlos Condit might make more sense for Wonderboy. I don't know if he's still in active competition, but Gunnar definitely needs to be looking above him. Neil Magny might be an option. He may be available. So I don't know. It's a tough one, but Gunnar remains a serious threat in that welterweight division, and arguably he hasn't looked better in the octagon than he did against Alain Jouban, who is a serious person to deal with in that octagon. He looked excellent against Mike Perry in his last fight. So really looking forward to seeing where Gunnar Nelson ends up fighting next. Maybe Stockholm. So we'll have to see. You could potentially see him on that card slotting into the co-main event slot beneath Alexander Gustafsson, but we'll have to wait and see. That all takes us to the man on the poster, the main event, and the man on the poster was the poster boy himself, Jimmy, the poster boy Manoa, against Corey Overtime Anderson. He's no longer 25-8, but he still is to us. They put on. I was going to say they put on a spectacular fight. They didn't. Jimmy put on a spectacular fight. Jimmy basically stuffed everything that Corey Anderson had to offer in the wrestling department, and then knocked him stiff with a right hand. It was a huge left hook. It was a remarkable performance, and from being the dangerous striker who hadn't been able to get a highlight reel finish, he's now 2 for 2 in his last 2 fights. Both huge left hook finishes, both knockouts. And Jimmy Manoa is all of a sudden a serious force to be reckoned with in that UFC light heavyweight division. And he had some people to call out after the fight, Sandhu, as well.
Yeah, he certainly did. And I love it. He's calling out the winner of DC Rumble, which is exactly what you should be doing if you're ranked number 4 in the UFC and you've just got a walk-off knockout win against the number 6 ranked opponent in a main event slot in your hometown. That's exactly what you should be doing. So kudos on Jimmy for doing that. And if they're not available, Simon, David Haye in a boxing match, which seems to be all the craze these days. MMA fighters calling out boxers. What have Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather started? Jesus bleeping Christ. Let's be realistic. In the interim, I don't think the boxing fight's going to happen, but I can definitely perhaps see that happening somewhere down the road. I know David Haye is a big fan of MMA. He's been cage side sitting alongside Dana White for quite some time. It's quite common knowledge in our little bubble that Jimmy Manoa does train with Dillian White. So he gets some top-level boxing, sparring and training in all the time. And, he's a London-based fighter. Why not have 2 guys from London who have headlined events from 2 different combat sports in the O2 Arena put on a boxing match? David Haye's coming off a loss. It might not be something that translates well around the world, but boxing is thriving in the UK. It's huge here. Still very much the predominant combat sport, mostly because boxing is on at prime time. But it's also helped that the promoters here in the UK have really got behind some of the emerging British talent, got them on massive platforms, told their stories, promoted them well, and made them household names. And they have turned into draws. They're consistently selling out arenas across the UK. It seems to have been doing really, really well on pay-per-view. They've got a fantastic deal with Sky Sports, so it's consistently getting the best mainstream sports coverage you can ask for in the UK. So, I'd like to obviously see Jimmy stay in MMA, stick around and get some more MMA fights in the UFC, because I don't think he's too far off a title shot himself. What I'd like to see happen next for Jimmy is I think the Shogun fight makes a lot of sense, Simon, and here's why. Like I said, I love the fact that he called out the winner of DC and Rumble. That's what he should be doing. But if I'm being realistic, with our new overlords, WME, IMG, I don't think that's the fight they're going to make. I think they're waiting for John Jones to come back in the summer and fight the winner of DC Rumble. DC's got on record, told MMA Junkie last week that he's nearing the end of his career. He wants to get this Rumble fight out of the way, and then he wants to fight Jones twice. Once won't be enough. Once would equal their Series 1 all, and then he wants to beat him one more time and then call it a day. And then on the outside chance that a fight falls apart or falls through, he may, think about fighting Gustafsson one more time if Gustafsson keeps his winning run going. But he'd like to avoid it if he can, because that Gustafsson fight was really, really tough. So kudos on Jimmy for doing what he said he was going to do and call out the winner of that title fight. I think the Shogun fight makes a lot of sense because it keeps his name in the picture. It keeps him active. He's in his late 30s. Try and get as many fights as you can and get some big paydays. That Rio card in June, UFC 212, would make a hell of a lot of sense because it's a pay-per-view event. That would be seen by a hell of a lot more people in America than this Fight Pass card in London. And actually, I think he'd spark Shogun. I think he'd beat him as well. So I think all the ingredients make sense for the Shogun fight. But going back to the performance, Simon, just absolutely happy for him, over the moon for him. Like I said, I was open and very critical of the fact that Jimmy's had opportunities, and he hasn't, contrary to what John Gooden said in the broadcast, he doesn't always hit the mark. He's had a few stumbling blocks here and there, but he's put it all together now. Back-to-back highlight knockouts on a UFC pay-per-view in UFC 204 and a main event in his backyard in the O2 Arena. It just doesn't get any better than that for Jimmy Manuwa.
No, I completely agree with the call out of the champion. I think when you're ranked 4th in the world and you've had a knockout like that, you've got to be shooting for the title. You've got to be. There's this little cluster of guys at the top of the UFC light heavyweight division. You've got Cormier, Johnson, Gustafsson, Teixeira's kind of on the bubble, and of course you've got John Jones whenever he comes back. And then it's the rest. And there's a bit of a gap between the rest and that little group. Maybe Teixeira's kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Teixeira's fighting Gustafsson, so that fight's done. Johnson's fighting Cormier, so that fight's done. John Jones comes back in the summer. That's a possibility. I can see the UFC booking that fight. But I can also see the UFC booking John Jones straight into a championship fight against the winner of DC and Rumble. So if that is going to happen, then Shogun Rua really is the next best option on the table. There isn't. You certainly don't want to be looking any further down the list. He's knocked out Corey Anderson. He's knocked out Ovin St. Preux. They're 6 and 8 respectively. Volkan Ozdemir a win over him is going to do nothing for his career. So, with all due respect to him, that's a pointless fight for Jimmy Manuwa. So really, it's the championship. It's John Jones or it's Shogun. They're the 3 fights. And I agree with you. I think he'd knock out Shogun. It's a fight that I wanted to see about 18 months ago. I was calling for it about 18 months, 2 years ago. I thought then it was a fight that Jimmy could win. I think Jimmy now would definitely win that fight. So it really is time for them to put Jimmy back in there with the very, very elite guys in the division, because I think he's now bridged that gap. I think he should now be considered part of that little cartel of light heavyweights at the top. The one thing is he hasn't had his shot yet, and I think it would be great to see him get that shot. If it's against Rumble Johnson, that would be particularly interesting because that would be a rematch. I think if Cormier hangs onto the belt, I think that basically shuts the door on a fight with Manuwa, because they're more likely to do the John Jones fight. So if you're a Jimmy Manuwa fan and you want to see him fight for the world title, I think you need to be cheering on Anthony Rumble Johnson when he takes on Daniel Cormier in a few weeks' time. But yeah, super impressed with him. Great knockout. He was pretty good in the media scrums and in the interview we had with him in the week. and he hinted at the boxing thing. I asked him about it on the Wednesday. I didn't think he was going to call out David Haye in the post-fight interview, though, Sandhu. I did not see that coming. But that is a fight I'm all up for. I'm not an enormous fan of Conor fighting Mayweather because I think Conor's a world champion. In fact, he's a 4-time world champion and he still hasn't defended any of them yet. So I'd kind of like him to do that. That would be my preference. I understand why the Mayweather fight is going to happen, but, I want him to defend one of his MMA world titles before he sort of gallops off into the sunset.
Well, he's only got one MMA world title defense fight. That's a UFC lightweight championship.
But what
he's not gonna go to Cage Warriors and defend his featherweight.
You know what I mean. He's won 4 world titles. He's defended none of them. He can only defend the one he's got. But yeah, I know what you mean. But yeah, I think he needs to defend that belt. But there you go. But no, I think Jimmy doesn't have that problem. Jimmy's not a world. He's not a world title holder. There may be a bit of a logjam ahead of him. So maybe there is possibility to do it. And he wouldn't need to be on the undercard of the Conor McGregor Floyd Mayweather event. If anything, he'd make less money if he was. Because if you did Jimmy Manuwa versus David Haye at the O2 Arena, David Haye filled out the O2 Arena fighting a guy who no one had heard of and a guy who I can't even remember. I think he was from Australia. He sold out the arena. That show, I think, was shown on Dave, that fight, the UK channel here.
Dave, what a name.
Yeah. We have a TV channel here called Dave, for anyone who isn't from the UK. It was an absolute walkover of a fight. Yet it sold out the O2. Sold it out. Jimmy Manuwa versus David Haye would definitely sell out the O2, and they can keep the money for themselves. So why be on the undercard? Be the main event. That fight, I think that fight, if you're going to do it, it makes sense to do it in the O2 in London. Balls to anybody else. Let them be the main event and let them make their money.
I tell you what it would do, Simon. It would boost Jimmy Manuwa's profile. It would boost the profile of MMA in the UK. It would definitely boost the profile of the UFC because it would get covered from Sky Sports, all the back pages of all the major newspapers here in the UK. And, if Jimmy Manuwa is in a holding pattern, given his record, and if it's only going to be a title shot that he's going to hold out for, why not do it? If, of course, the UFC would allow him to do it. And I think, again, this is what the Mayweather-McGregor fight might do, is the UFC is going to have to give the allowance for McGregor to do this contractually. And again, it's a difficult one because if you allow one guy to do it, why not allow another guy to do it? It's just once you kind of open those doors, sometimes it can be looked at from the outside looking in that you're kind of treating fighters unfairly, and it's kind of weird because the UFC have allowed their fighters to compete in grappling and BJJ tournaments and events and bits and pieces. Never anyone in boxing. This will definitely be the first if this Mayweather-McGregor fight happens. But I don't blame the fighters for trying to do this. You see Anderson Silva, Roy Jones Jr. They're talking about it. And hey, you know what, Simon? Worst case scenario, at least it's probably got Jimmy Manuwa a couple of extra headlines.
Absolutely. And here's something that it came to mind on the way home from UFC London. With all of this talk, why not become a boxing promoter as well? UFC boxing. Why not add that string to the bow of that particular organisation? Give them the power to hold and promote boxing events. Yeah, MMA is the bread and butter. But if the line is beginning to get blurred, rather than be the one who's cut out of a deal, be the people who are slap bang in the middle of the deal. And I think that might make sense as well. But no, interesting to see what happens with Jimmy Manuwa. He's had a very interesting career path. He came into the sport very late. Took him 3 contract offers from the UFC before he eventually took one. And since then, he's gradually moved his way up. He's had a couple of setbacks. He's bounced back from them. And now here he is, arguably on the cusp of a title shot. He might need one more win, or maybe he won't. Maybe he'll get the next one. Who knows? But that was a landmark win for the poster boy on Saturday night. and the crowd absolutely loved it. Everybody loves a one-punch walk-off knockout, and that one was a little bit special from Jimmy the Poster Boy Manuwa. That wraps things up, Sandhu, for the UFC London recap. It was a good week and a good weekend, and a fight card that everybody was crapping on actually delivered some good fights. And I think the people who bought their tickets will walk away feeling pretty happy with what they saw, I think.
Yeah, I agree. But I think the next time the UFC comes to town, especially London, they need to deliver, especially with some big name value fighters, especially at the top end of the card. I think they got away with it this time because the tickets went on sale before they officially announced the main event, and I think there was the perceived, I suppose, misconception from the fan base that, oh yeah, sure, I'm sure the UFC will bring a Gegard Mousasi versus a Luke Rockhold or a Chris Weidman, someone of that ilk or caliber, to our shores and to our capital. That wasn't the case. Like I said, now that the fights and the events in the books, I've got no complaints about it. I think the storyline of Jimmy Manuwa headlining the card and winning is huge for him and used for, how many Londoners, in any kind of individual sport in the world, get the rub and get the shine like Jimmy Manuwa has got this past weekend in any given sport. If you look at some of the other UK or British athletes out there, you've got Andy Murray in tennis, but he's a proud Scot, and I hate the fact that the English media all of a sudden kind of claim a Scottish or a Welsh or a Northern Irish kind of athlete as British, but whenever there's somebody specifically from England, he's English. You know what I mean? I always hate that, and it happens too often. But right now they've got someone in Jimmy Manuwa who they can really get behind. And the one thing I will say about London events, and then probably we'll wrap this whole kind of segment up, it always gets the most media turnout of any European event, barring, I'd reckon, a McGregor fight in Dublin, right? The turnout was brilliant all week long, absolutely packed. And we've been on the circuit, Simon. We've been to events in Stockholm, in Berlin, in Rotterdam, in Poland, and it gets decent turnout, especially from the local indigenous media from the market that we're traveling to. But overall, it's pretty comfortable. Everyone's got room to kind of throw a few elbows and bits and pieces. But that media day on Thursday was absolutely packed. It really was. It kind of almost mirrored some of the big pay-per-view turnouts that the UFC gets over stateside. So decent turnout, and we rock on. That was the first of 5 planned events for the European circuit. They'll be back in the UK with a Glasgow event in the summer in July. So the weather will be nice then. That'd be great. And who knows? I hope your speculation is correct, Simon. It'd be great to pop over to either Belfast or Dublin at the back end of the year. Or who knows? Maybe they'll even pull an audible and have Michael Bisping over if he's still champion at the end of the year for another title defense. We can only dream.
That wouldn't be bad, would it? Just to run you through the European UFC shows we have currently scheduled between now and the end of the year. May the 28th in Stockholm, Sweden, the Ericsson Globe will play host to UFC Fight Night. Gustafsson versus Teixeira. That's May the 28th. Then we go up to July the 16th, where the SSE Hydro, spectacular arena, the SSE Hydro up there in Glasgow, will play host to UFC Fight Night. We have no matchup for that yet. Obviously, we're still a fair ways to go before we get to that. But that's up there in Glasgow, Scotland, July the 16th. We go to Rotterdam. That was my favourite European trip of last year. That I absolutely loved Rotterdam. And we're going back on September the 2nd to the Ahoy Rotterdam, the same venue, for a UFC Fight Night event. And then on October the 21st, our 5th UFC Fight Night in the European region will take place at the Ergo Arena in Gdansk, Poland, October the 21st. So we've got plenty of European stuff coming your way, and that's betting without the stuff that Bellator is bringing over the course of the year. Plus, you can chuck in the stuff that's coming from BAMMA and Cage Warriors. Cage Warriors have just announced they're going back to London. BAMMA have just announced their next show in Birmingham. So things are really beginning to heat up, and it's really encouraging to see that actually, if you put all these dates on a bit of paper, it's a pretty busy schedule in and of itself. So it's really good to see the European scene really coming alive, and I suspect ACB might be coming back over as well. So we've got plenty of stuff to get our teeth into on this side of the pond. But the next big show will be UFC 210 stateside in Buffalo, New York. Daniel Cormier versus Anthony Rumble Johnson, the rematch. That's where we are with the show, Sandhu. We're going to wrap this up and say goodbye, but we've got a couple of questions to attend to first, yeah?
We've got a few questions, but actually, Simon, there's a bit of breaking news, and I want to be cheeky and quickly get a segment in on this right now.
Let's do it.
As we're recording, only because we might be the first ones to be able to react to it, and I want to be cheeky with the old SEO when this actually gets published.
Let's do it.
So Bellator, literally in the last half an hour, via the Associated Press, have just announced they're going to be heading to Madison Square Garden, New York City, with a pay-per-view event on June the 24th, headlined by Chael Sonnen versus Wanderlei Silva. So that's huge. That's massive for quite a few different reasons. Number one, Chael Sonnen versus Wanderlei Silva, that's been a fight that everyone's kind of sort of been looking forward to for quite some time anyway. It was a fight that the UFC were supposed to put along, I think about 4 or 5 years ago now. And they even had an Ultimate Fighter down in Brazil building up to this potential fight. Obviously, we know the story now. It's been well documented. They were both unceremoniously kind of departed from the UFC. There was drug tests involved and failed tests and suspensions, and they both managed to find them both of themselves in Bellator. And I'm absolutely surprised, Simon. I have to say I'm gobsmacked. Madison Square Garden, Simon. Madison Square Garden, and it's going to be on pay-per-view. It's on June 24th, which is just a couple of weeks before International Fight Week for the UFC in Las Vegas. This is only the second time that the organization Bellator are going to attempt a pay-per-view event. The last time was Tito Ortiz versus was it Rampage, and then there was a fallout on that one, or did that fight go through? I can't even remember now from the top of my head. But what's your initial reaction to that, Simon?
My initial reaction is wow. The fact that they're doing it at Madison Square Garden is quite the statement as well. Bellator haven't been on pay-per-view for a little while either, so this is a big power move from Scott Coker there, and Chael Sonnen is coming back. I think there's going to be a certain amount of cynicism, if I'm honest, towards the main event, given the performance that Chael delivered against Tito Ortiz. Didn't cover himself in any glory whatsoever in that fight, and now Bellator are asking people to pay money to watch a main event featuring him again.
King Mo and Rampage Jackson, sorry. That was the fight. It was King Mo, Rampage Jackson. Tito Ortiz pulled out of that fight due to injury. Now it's all coming back to me. There you go. That's it.
So Chael Sonnen versus Wanderlei Silva, that's a fight that we were hoping to see 4 or 5 years ago. We're now going to see it at Madison Square Garden. It's great to see Bellator really spreading their wings with this. For me, the success of this card is going to be entirely dependent on who else is on that fight card. Ryan Bader has just joined the fold. You'd think sticking him on that card, maybe put him against Phil Davis, stick him on that card. Is this the time to give Michael Venom Page the push? Maybe that would eventually. Well, that would mean taking him off the London card because of the date. We're talking June 24th, aren't we? So that's a difficult one. That's a difficult one because he's on a London fight card and he's a London fighter, and I can already hear the British fans saying, "Shut up, Simon. We want him to fight in London." But if you're Bellator, you want him at Madison Square Garden, surely. It's a really tricky one. You want to put your best foot forward if you're going to go back on pay-per-view and you're going to showcase your best people. Michael Venom Page on pay-per-view, I think will certainly help shift a few pay-per-view buys, even if Chael Sonnen versus Wanderlei Silva doesn't. I think for everybody who's excited to see that fight, there will be people who are really cynical about it. But if you back that up with some real blue chip fights underneath, it kind of gives you a bit of latitude. So I think how that card is built underneath that main event will be absolutely critical to the success of it. I'm excited to hear about it though, and I think it's good that Bellator are continuing to grow. The UFC are the undisputed number one in this sport, but I think having a strong number two, chasing them on the rails, if you like, and trying to offer a viable alternative is good for the industry. It's good for the fans, and it just means we hopefully get to see even more good fights. This one's a bit of a throwback fight. I'd certainly be interested in watching it, but as I say, I want to see who's on that undercard because I think that's going to be the real driver of success for that event.
There's a quote that I want to read out to you, Simon, and to our listeners. This is from Scott Coker via the Associated Press. We always said that when we came to New York, we'll bring the biggest and the best fight card we've ever had in the history of this company. We're putting it together, and our roster is robust enough that we feel like it's time to get into the pay-per-view business, so here we go. Later on the article, he says, I think Bellator 180, that's the event, Bellator 180, will be the most exciting fight card in MMA this year so far. I mean, who knows what's going to happen before the end of the year, but I think this is going to be the biggest fight card put together by any company so far in the pay-per-view business, so we feel really good about it. So that's incredible. That is incredible. So they kicked off with Wanderlei Silva versus Chael Sonnen, who are two of the biggest iconic names in the sport, period. Yes, there's a bit of an asterisk on both their names in recent years, but I think most casual fans and most mainstream fans, when they hear those names, they'll probably turn a blind eye to some of the history there, and they'll just be excited to see the axe murderer take on the American gangster. And you know that they're going to promote the hell out of this fight, that's for sure. It's a massive stage for them as well. And I remember when Chael left the UFC, and they had just subsequently announced they were going to enter New York. It was official, MSG. It was always one of the kind of things that Chael wanted to be a part of as a big MMA event in Madison Square Garden. He's going to get that opportunity now. But like you said, Simon, what Bellator need to do now, and they absolutely must do this, especially if it's on pay-per-view, they need to go all guns blazing. I think perhaps maybe you bring in Ryan Bader straight in for a title fight against Phil Davis. I mean, why not? That'll be one title fight to put on that card. You've got the likes of, I don't know, I think maybe you go with the recognizable UFC names. Maybe use a Benson Henderson, And who knows, Simon, maybe if Michael Venom Page, if things go well for him in London in May, and he comes away unscathed, and no injuries, and he's able to turn around quickly, even if at that stage it's too late to put him on the pay-per-view main card, I'm sure the lead-in on Spike will have a massive rating and viewership for that particular event, just given the promotion they're going to put behind it. And also, a little tidbit from the story, this is going to be broadcast live in the US, so there won't be a tape delay from the East Coast to the West Coast like there normally is for other Bellator shows.
You can't do that on pay-per-view, can you?
No, so everything's going to be live coast to coast, which is quite new for Bellator to do that. So this is getting quite a lot of buzz on social media, online, by everyone in the MMA community. Everyone's got an opinion on this, so I thought it was worthwhile us kind of bringing it up and raising it now.
Absolutely.
Instead of waiting an entire week. Yeah.
Well, they should. Another fight that has to be on that card surely is Fedor versus Mitrione. Surely they redo that fight.
Wow, yeah.
Surely they redo that fight on that card. That fight fell through in San Jose. I know they were talking about trying to do the fight again in San Jose, but I think when you got Madison Square Garden, Fedor Emelianenko at Madison Square Garden is a no-brainer. They've just signed Bader. We've mentioned him. they've just signed Lorenz Larkin, and the welterweight division in Bellator MMA is arguably the strongest division they have. So give Lorenz Larkin a high-profile matchup. It's almost unfortunate timing that this London show is so close. It's just over a month before, and three of the most bankable stars that they have are on that card. You know, Rory MacDonald is about to make his Bellator debut against another one of their welterweight stars, Paul Semtex Daly, who always brings the heat. That would make for a fantastic New York fight. Michael Venom Page, who's big box office and deserves to be on the big stage. All three of those guys are going to be competing at Wembley Arena just over a month before that fight. So it's unlikely we're going to see them on that card, which is a shame because I think the stage is set for all of them. But it's good for us because we're going to get them in England. The other tiny nagging worry in my mind is there any possibility that given what they're looking to do in stacking the deck for Madison Square Garden, could they postpone this London event even and look to put it on later in the year in order to free up these stars? Because they've got a growing roster, but it's not an enormous roster. And if you want to put on a show that's as big as Scott Coker's suggesting, then you want all your big stars on it. And great for us, we've got them coming over here. But you've got to think they must be wishing they could get them on that MSG card. So really looking forward to seeing how they put that card together. Dylan Dennis has signed for Bellator as well, hasn't he? Could they give him a run out on the prelims? You know, showcasing...
Can you imagine if Dylan Dennis has got a fight and he's got Conor McGregor in his corner walking him out in Madison Square Garden for a Bellator event? Could you imagine?
That would just be that'd be just ridiculous. But yeah, it's a big story. It's a big story, and I like the fact that it's happening. I don't think that the main event should be the main event, though. I've got to go on record. If you can do Fedor versus Mitrione, you put those two above Chael Sonnen. I don't think Chael Sonnen deserves to be in the main event of this because of the performance he put in last time out. I think you need your most legitimate talent at the top of that card. I know he's a big name. I know he's a great promoter of the sport and all the rest of it. But if Fedor's available, you put Fedor at the top of that card. No questions asked. Without a doubt. Fedor Mitrione should headline that card.
The main thing here to take away from a new story like this, Simon, is here we are in 2017. Bellator, like you said, are really kind of making waves now. You're into, I think, year 3 of the Scott Coker era. And this is what we want. We want there to be some real competition because competition makes everyone better, right? Makes the fighters better, makes the organizations better. There's more opportunities. Like I said, Bellator are aggressively expanding here in Europe, which means there'll be bigger and better fight cards here. More opportunities for us in the media, more events for the fans to pick and choose from in regards to what they want to see. So things are starting to spice up now. Really starting to spice up and heat up in the world of MMA, especially when it comes to top level competition between two promotions. The UFC gobbled up Pride and Strikeforce, and they pretty much had it their own way for a long time. But now Bellator this year are really starting to make some big statements. And they continue to sign fighters when they become available from the UFC on the open free agency market. And you know what? It's good for the fighters. If they're getting paid more, they're getting better deals, the more power to them. So it's a story that I'm sure that we'll be monitoring all week long. And as we don't have actually a UFC event this weekend or next weekend, we were talking about what we'll do for next week's show, and I think it might be looking at 2 or 3 of the hottest news stories in the MMA cycle, and perhaps by then we'll have more information on this Bellator pay-per-view, which we'll talk about in more detail next week. Absolutely.
Bit of breaking news on the Brit Pack from Mr. Sandhu. Good stuff, mate. What have we got in terms of questions? Let's rip through. We're about to hit the 2-hour mark. Would you believe? We're only a few minutes short. This is another monster podcast coming to you from the Brit Pack. Thank you for sticking with us.
Well, we've got a few questions. To be honest with you, these are questions that we pretty much answered in our kind of review and recap of the London show. So we'll kind of zip through these very, very quickly. The first one comes in from the MMA Manor, who says, I saw Mr. Sandhu tweet that he doesn't think Manuel will get the winner of DC Rumble. I assume he thinks it will be John Jones, because surely it can't be Gus for a third time. If Jimmy doesn't get the next shot, who's next for him? Everyone else is ranked below. We've kind of already discussed this, Simon. I like to see the Shogun fight, unless Glover beats Gustafsson. If Glover beats Gustafsson, then I think Glover might make more sense for Manoa. If Gustafsson wins that fight, I think they've already both gone on record saying they're not going to fight each other, because things are a little bit different now versus the first time that they fought. The first time they fought, they'd already trained with each other here and there. These days, they're very much full-time training partners. Jimmy's always flying out to Stockholm for long periods of time. So that's just not going to be something that I can see in their future. What do you think, Simon? If Shogun doesn't happen and David Haye doesn't happen and Glover Teixeira wins, is that a fight that makes sense?
Yeah, it's the only other viable fight, really, if you think about it. I mean, if you're not going to give him a title fight and you're not going to give him John Jones, then I guess the only other option is you give him the loser of the title fight. That's the only other option. So if Rumble Johnson beats Cormier, and then John Jones fights Rumble, you could do Manoa versus Cormier. That's the only other permutation that we haven't really spoken about. He could get the loser of the title fight, depending on how much of a holding pattern they want to put him on. So there are options there. I want him fighting up. I don't really want him fighting below, and certainly don't want him fighting below Shogun. I think Shogun's one place below him in the rankings right now at 5. I don't even know if I want to see him fight Shogun. I want him to fight one of the guys above him. So whether that's Glover Teixeira, whether that's the loser of the title fight, the winner of the title fight, or John Jones, I think it's got to be one of them. It has to be.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I want to kind of reiterate that. I would like to see him fight one of the guys ahead of him too, Simon. I just think that the way WME are set up and how they're matchmaking, how they're putting events together, I think they're going to lean more towards him and Shogun, just given how they probably have the blueprint set out for the rest of the light heavyweight division's top 3 or 4, depending on who wins between DC and Rumble. So that's just my gut instinct there. But you're right. Yeah, listen, if the loser of DC Rumble would make a lot of sense too. They've just come off a big rub, being in a main event pay-per-view title fight. So that would be a lot of shine to take away off somebody as well. Graham Hughes tweets in and says, does Jimmy get the next crack at the belt, or has he got to win another in between? Regardless of who he fights next, Simon, I think it's one more and then a title shot. You agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely that he gets the next shot. It would be, obviously, if it comes, then fantastic. I think he might need to win one more, because he hasn't won a fight against a top 4 opponent yet. That's it's not a criticism, it's just the truth. He's beaten a guy who's a few places below him in the rankings, beat him decisively, I think if he beats one of that elite group that I referred to earlier, then I think he deserves his title. He deserves his title shot. I think he arguably deserves one already, but I think he really needs to cement that, and a win over one of the top 4 will really do that. So yeah, I think probably one more against one of the top 4 guys, and then if he wins that, give him a shot at the belt.
RG tweets in and says, in the immediate aftermath of UFC London, shouldn't we all be talking about Yorkshire's Mark Diakiese more? We absolutely should, and we absolutely are. And I think in the coming days, weeks, and months, we'll see him get more exposure. I thought it was a nice little bit. I think he posed for a gay magazine, which got headlines, and it's 2017. It is what it is. But kudos to him, because I think a lot of alpha males in this sport especially combat sports, perhaps wouldn't go down that route. So I thought that was I don't want to call it a brave decision. That's not the kind of word I'm looking for. But I thought it was really great to see that a young alpha male athlete from a combat sports arena would be willing to do something like that. And again, all it's doing for him is breaking barriers. It's tapping into a new market. It's perhaps educating a readership or an audience that perhaps, I don't know, may not be into this sport. Who knows? But I thought that was great to see. And if we can see more opportunities put out in front of him, because aesthetically he is got this kind of charisma and personality that shines through. We talk about his choice in hair color and hairstyle, which it makes a statement. It makes people it makes them noticeable and stand out, just like the red mohawk did for Dan Hardy. So I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean he's a star in the making, isn't he? I think the thing with him at the moment is we're still in the discovery phase with Mark Diakiese. What we're seeing of him right now is really, really good. It's really exciting. We haven't seen him come up against adversity yet, and we haven't seen just how good he can be yet. So we're still in that discovery phase, and I think, we're going to, hopefully he can stay injury free, and we can keep him active over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, and we get to see him another 4, 5, 6 times in the next 18 months. And I think by the time we get to the end of that period, we'll have a very good idea of just how far that lad can go. I'm excited at the prospect of seeing him really progress, because he's just got that. He's got that X factor about him that I think could potentially make him a star. Michael Venom Page has got it, and I think he's got it too. They're not the same. They are different. They are different fighters. But I do think they've both got that X factor that just marks them out as being a potential superstar. But you've got to earn your stripes. You've got to work your way up, and you've got to get to that level. MVP is doing that in Bellator, and he's being very successful. And Mark Diakiese so far is doing very similar things in the UFC. Really excited to see where they go. And isn't it great to see people getting excited over a British fighter working their way up? We're the Brit Pack, and to see a British fighter generating this much excitement, not just over here, but the boys over in America, our American and Canadian colleagues in the MMA media over there, they're beginning to get excited about Mark Diakiese as well, and I think is fantastic to see. And the sky's the limit for him. Let's see how far he can take it.
And the final question comes in from Bailey. He says, after another fantastic performance from Mark Diakiese, who would you match him up with against next? And we spoke about this a little bit earlier on. I love your idea of Sage Northcutt, Simon. Absolutely. I think that would be fantastic if they went down that route. I know our colleague Mike Bonn in his Joe Silva's shoes, not here anymore, but Sean Shelby's shoes article for MMA Junkie mentioned Brian T. City Ortega, which I wouldn't mind either. But whoever it is, hopefully if it's not a ranked opponent, it's a name opponent. And I think Diakiese is now ready to step up and start to see what he's capable of. And he's a very flashy fighter. So, yeah, that's what I think he should do next.
Yeah, if it's in America, Sage Northcutt. If it's in Europe, David Tamer. They're the two. Either one of those, you'll make me a happy man.
And that's it. That's all the questions for this week, Simon. Again, just to let everybody know, if you want to get your questions in throughout the week, and actually, if you're listening, we'd really love to have you really inundate us with as many questions as you can throughout the next 7 days. So whenever you're listening to this, if you're listening to this on a Tuesday morning, a Tuesday afternoon, a Tuesday evening, take a second, think about something that's coming to mind. What's kind of really causing you to think about things in the MMA circle and the MMA bubble? And hit me and Simon with a question or two, because I think we're going to need it next week, because there's no UFC event on this weekend or next weekend. So perhaps we can open up the platform next weekend and perhaps just do a lengthier Q&A segment. So get your questions in. The handle to include, regardless of whether you're including me or Simon, is at the Brit Pack MMA. That's the handle you have to include if you want to get your question included into the show. I'll then find it, give it a like, so you know that it'll get mentioned in the show, and that's it. Bob's your uncle, fun as you're on.
Great stuff. That's one for the American listeners to try and work out what the hell you just said. But yeah, that is episode number 32 of the Brit Pack, a bumper edition of the Brit Pack this week. Thank you for sticking with us for the past 2 hours and 5 minutes. We will leave you to the rest of your week. Please do hit us up with questions, as Sandhu said. Tweet us at the Brit Pack MMA. You can check out our website where you'll find all the details about the show. That is thebritpackmma.com. You can subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher. It's late. iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Acast. And you can obviously check us out on social media at Sandhu MMA and at Simon Head. That was the Brit Pack episode number 32. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy whatever you've got planned for the next week. I don't think we've got too much on in the way of major MMA events. So feel free to tweet us and let us know what you're going to do with your gap weekend. I'm going to be watching MotoGP. We will not be doing a podcast on that. We will speak to you in a week's time. Until then, speak soon.